I always seem to mention Metallica in many of my videos. I'm sure those of you who aren't big fans are tired of it by now. After all, JMap and I did a special series of videos where we talked about each album. If you don't already know by now, I'm a big Metallica fan, so let's just get this out right now. Being the die-hard Metallica fan that I am, I will always be a supporter of them, their music, and their legacy. They've been around for 31 years. That's a long time for a band to keep going and still remain top at what they do. At every show they headline, it's a sea of a standing room only crowd. Every generation, there always will be new fans to accompany the older existing fan base. Thousands will flock to see them time and time again, no matter the place, even if it was in the middle of a war zone. Regardless if you hate them now because of something they did or didn't do, or if you've always hated them, Metallica remains as one of the biggest influential bands of all time, having sold more than 100 million albums worldwide. And to quote Korn's Jonathan Davis, they've always done things their way. They persevered over the years and they're still relevant to this day. But there is one thing that almost every basher will always say about them. Fuck them, they sold out when they did this, they sold out when they did that. They're not cool anymore, their music sucks now, they're a bunch of old money-grabbing attention whores. Honestly, these accusations are getting old, and when people say they sold out in the form of losing their integrity, a lot of times it's a simple-minded accusation that sounds like a broken record to me. And they have been accused of this as early as their second album, Ride the Lightning, in 1984. Well, allow me, Desert County 22, to go over many of these selling out myths and state my piece on why I feel they are false. Myth number 1. They sold out when they made a ballad on their second album, Ride the Lightning. Fact. The entire Ride the Lightning as a whole is a step in the different direction from Kill 'Em All. Whereas Kill 'Em All is an album of mostly fast-hitting thrash songs, Ride the Lightning expands a little from having songs just as fast and thrashy as Kill 'Em All, like Fight Fire with Fire, to heavier songs like For Whom the Bell Tolls, and to their first ballad, Fade to Black. The title song itself, Ride the Lightning, is one of my all-time favorite songs, and that song also has a lot of tempo changes in it. Lars Ulrich said, when people heard an acoustic guitar in Fade to Black, there was a nuclear meltdown in the heavy metal community. And James Hetfield said in an interview, that song was a big step for us. It was pretty much our first ballad, so we knew it would freak people out. I was pretty depressed at the time because our gear had been stolen, and we had been thrown out of our manager's house for breaking shit and drinking his liquor cabinet dry. It's a suicide song, and we got a lot of flack for it, as if kids were killing themselves because of the song. But we also got hundreds of letters from kids telling us how they related to it, and it made them feel better. Instantly, there were a few who were unhappy with the direction, and even scolded the band in their shows by waving tissues at them. These were the people who pretty much wanted the thrash metal bands to just stay thrash and were accustomed to that style, which was just taking off. A similar uproar happened a few years later in 1988 when Slayer came out with South of Heaven, which Slayer purposely slowed down the tempo for that record because they felt they couldn't top their classic Rain and Blood. However, ever since then, both of those albums have ended up being regarded as classic thrash metal albums anyway. And Fade to Black is one of my favorites still, and it was one of the first songs I heard by them, and I still never get tired from them. And judging by the growing fan base at the time and beyond, they didn't lose 1 ounce of integrity with that song. So now we go to the second myth. Metallica would not have sold out and gone soft if Cliff Burton was still alive. Here's the fact. When Metallica signed to Elektra Records, a higher label as they were going through the ranks, their third album, Master of Puppets, was their big commercial breakthrough. But sadly, as most know, Cliff Burton died in a bus accident and did not live to see the band achieve the success it did. Many will say that Metallica wouldn't have evolved so much if Cliff was there, and that is actually false. Cliff may have only been in the band for 3 years, but his influence was greater than most people think. In 1983, the only 2 metal bassists that played a melodic counterpart to the main guitar riffs were Iron Maiden's Steve Harris and Cliff Burton. Cliff may have been apart from the release of Kill 'Em All, but his album was practically done by the time he joined, and his only credit is his bass solo. It was Cliff who was a major part of the melodic shift in adding harmonies to Metallica's music during the 80s. Just look at his writing credits on Ride the Lightning. He is all over that album with writing credits. He also had an interest in working with a major producer later on, which is what the band would end up doing in 1990. He may have been the most metalhead guy in the band at the time, but with the band's next 2 albums and Justice for All and the Black Album still be made if Cliff were alive? Oh yeah, they would. Would the two Load albums be made? Oh yeah. After all, this was a man who listened to Johann Sebastian Bach on a regular basis, and as well as a lot of classical music. And early on, he also had a lot of country, southern rock, and blues influences in his writing. Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? So then, here we go to myth number 3. Metallica sold out when they made a music video for MTV. For years, Metallica was actually refused by MTV for their exposure, and they literally got all their exposure through word of mouth and being promoted alongside headlining bands at the time, like Venom and Ozzy. Yes, they said they would not make a video, so obviously some people got mad when all of a sudden they appeared on MTV with their music video of One. James Hetfield said, as I quote, "One person came up to me and spat in my face because we made a video." Obviously people started being idiots because they needed to at least look at the facts. One, the song One sounds like anything they did at the time, which was not commercial at all. Most music videos and hit singles that are the most accessible songs on the record, or a lot of times the one song on a CD that is meant to sound commercial and catchy to make people want to buy the rest of the CD. Not only is the song not catchy, but the song is about the horrors of war. Hardly anything that's mainstream. 2, the music video itself wasn't commercial either. Most rock music videos at the time were very cheesy, had men wearing makeup and sporting perms, surrounded by hot chicks in spandex or lingerie. I mean, just look at music videos by Motley Crue, Bon Jovi, and Def Leppard at the time, and you'll see what I mean. Metallica deliberately made a video which was nothing like that. It was dark, depressing, and hardly anything that looked poppy. 3, the band was already selling many copies of their first 3 albums without any commercial exposure, music videos, or hit singles. It's not like they exploded into life after the video. The music video was literally a screw you to MTV. And why is it that Iron Maiden could constantly make music videos starting from their Number of the Beast days right up to today with many compilations and DVD releases? Yet whenever Metallica made a video, half the world started moaning. Doesn't make sense if you ask me. Myth number 4. They sold out with the Black Album because they hired Bob Rock and made more commercial songs. 1, just because Bob Rock was someone who produced with people like Motley Crue and Cher at the time doesn't mean they sold out by hiring him. Bob Rock was the man producing the best produced albums at the time, and they spent their own money to hire him. It cost almost $1 million to make. The album was remixed 3 times and ended 3 marriages due to the troubled production. How is that selling out when they almost risked financial loss with it? But Bob Rock was not the reason for the style change. The band themselves wanted to do the style change, not Bob Rock's insistence. James Hetfield said, "Radio airplay was not our intention, but because we felt we had pretty much done the longer song format to death, we considered a good change doing songs with just 2 riffs and only taking 2 minutes to get the point across." Kirk Hammett also pointed out when the band would play the song and Justice for All live, he couldn't stand watching the front row start to yawn by the 8th or 9th minute. In essence, they did want to try something new, and they didn't want to grow stale. The Black Album was still a pretty damn heavy album, and still had its share of songs with thrash and speed elements like Holier Than Thou, but people often remember it for the songs that became hit singles like Sandman, Sad But True, Unforgiven, Nothing Else Matters. Naturally, a lot of people were saying, "This isn't Master of Puppets," but others still accepted it as an indication of the band's natural stylistic evolution. Sure, the album became a #1 hit, their highest album to date, but did Metallica change their whole attitude about it? No. Their live shows were still wild and crazy as ever, and they still kept the moniker from the beginning that said, "If people like us, we welcome them. If not, then screw them." Other metal bands at the time, before and after, also had style changes. Iron Maiden's Peace of Mind was a style change from Number of the Beast during the Ride the Lightning days, and that album was regarded as a classic. And also, by the late 80s, Iron Maiden was adding synth to their sound on records like Somewhere in Time, which was a big 80s thing at the time. Almost everyone was doing it at the time, but did metal fans complain? Like I said before, Slayer was also making records that were noticeably slower paced, but were people complaining? Megadeth's Countdown to Extinction started a trend similar to the Black Album where they started playing slower and simpler songs. Did people complain then? Anthrax in the time did a mashup with Public Enemy. Did people complain about that? Myth number 5. Metallica sold out with the release of Load and Reload and Getting Haircuts. Naturally, when Load came out, everyone did the whole, "This isn't Master of Puppets." And sure, the album was far different than anything they had done before. Instead of the thrash sound of the 80s, the Load and Reload albums had a more traditional heavy metal sound with hard rock and bluesy sound too. Aren't there other big time metal bands that have albums like that? Wait, doesn't Black Sabbath have that kind of a sound too? And wasn't the band Metallica also heavily influenced by Sabbath? The music off these albums is simply what they were feeling at the time. They weren't trying to reinvent themselves or go commercial, they were simply doing things their way and their way only. They could have said, alright, we got this heavy metal thing down after 5 big albums, we should keep doing the same thing to keep the fans happy, but they didn't. Now let's look at bands that always make the same album every release, like AC/DC. Sure, maybe some of their diehard fans stay happy, but the casual fans will say, well, once you heard Back in Black, you heard them all. And I may be stubborn as a mule at times, but hearing the same thing over and over does get rather stale, even if the mentioned album is regarded as a classic. So Metallica was always about going against the grain. Everyone expected them to make another Black album or heavy metal classic, and instead, they knew that whatever album they would make after the Black album would always be shadowed by it, and that it would not get the same success. So they branched out, knowing it would piss the people off. They lost some fans, gained some, and still kept those who were behind them no matter what. It still sucks, though, that there are still those who like to pretend Load and Reload don't exist, and often complain about the songs from these albums having occasional appearances in their live sets. Well, I say give something new a chance. A lot of these people haven't even given these albums an even listen, or they listen to one song and say, nope, this isn't thrash, sorry. I, on the other hand, have repeatedly said I love the Load albums. I consider Bleeding Me to be one of my favorite anthems. I love the interpersonal songs and the stuff that I can relate to on many levels. I can't do that with songs about nuclear war all the time. As for the haircut thing, since why does heavy metal have to mean long hair? When metal god Bruce Dickinson briefly left Iron Maiden for a solo career and later cut his hair short, where was the uproar then? Oh right, there wasn't, because people realized he actually looked better with short hair. Same went with Matt Barlow from Iced Earth. He looked more tougher as a police officer than with his famed red mane. Rob Halford never sported long hair in his heyday, and nobody said anything about that. And when you have the guys with shaved heads like Kerry King and Scott Ian, which are people who had hair until they started to go bald and didn't want to sport a skullet. So they cut their hair at one point. Who cares? It's a common misconception that they all collectively got haircuts at the same time, which is in fact wrong. Jason Newsted's hair got singed so bad from pyro smoke during a gig that he had to shave it. James Hetfield sported a mullet a couple years later due to having to get stitches in his head from a skateboarding accident. It was a gradual change that ended by 1996. And also by 1996, long hair had become what was in during the 90s grunge and alternative movement. So Metallica, being who they were, decided screw that and kept going against the grain. And also let me note that a few years later, Hammett would grow his hair back, and Lars and James would also try to grow their hair back on several occasions. Myth number 6. They sold out when they did a live Symphony album. When I took one of my buddies on the Death Magnetic tour, he was somebody who saw Metallica in small clubs when they started, and he told me, as long as they don't do any of that Symphony stuff, I'm fine. Jeez, what was so wrong about that album? They took their best-known songs and experimented with having a symphonic track in the background. The original studio recording of Nothing Else Matters also has classical harmony in the background, and Deep Purple did it before too in 1969. Where was the complaint about that? Nobody said anything about the Scorpions doing it either. I don't know what people have against symphony and classical music being included in a metal song. There are also other popular metal bands that included small amounts of symphony in songs, like Iron Maiden's Passchendaele and Journeyman, Iced Earth's Gettysburg Suite, Dream Theater's Score live album, Judas Priest's Nostradamus album, and there's even an entire subgenre that I happen to also love called symphonic metal. Bands like Nightwish, Sonata Arctica, Camelot, Epica, Within Temptation, After Forever, Revamp. Maybe it's not their cup of tea, but I still love it. It makes anything that's supposed to be fast, heavy, and especially melodic very beautiful sounding to my ears. And heavy metal music as a whole has often been regarded as the most influenced by classical music. And many of the heavy Anthems like Master of Puppets, Megadeth's Holy Wars, Iron Maiden's Rime of the Ancient Mariner have been described as having their own symphony due to the tempo changes and progression, which is something that a lot of classical music is. I remember when VH1 had a special called the Top 100 Most Unmetal Moments in History, and bands using symphony was listed, and these people complaining kept saying, these bands including symphony in the music has got to stop, although Metallica did it well. Shut up already. And guess what? You know who had the idea for Metallica to combine their sound with an epic classical approach? Cliff Burton. He is the one that listened to classical music in the first place. And many classical influences with the harmony and melodic characteristics are on the albums like Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets. You could call this album as one of their many tributes to Cliff. How is that selling out? What could possibly have they gained from something that not a lot of people were doing? Again, it was them doing things their own way. Myth number 7, they sold out with the Napster controversy. To this day, I still get many older adults that tell me they were big Metallica fans until, quote, Lars said we couldn't download their music. I think that's part misunderstanding and partly false. Now, I realize this is the hardest one to touch up upon because this is the event that got them the most negative response. But let's try to get the facts straight here. One, what brought this to their attention was the song that they were working on, I Disappear, was a work-in-progress demo that somehow got leaked and was being downloaded on a mass scale for free. Then they noticed that all their songs were available for free, and they told Napster to stop letting them have their songs be downloaded. And Napster said no, therefore the lawsuit happened. Metallica wasn't the only one. It was a number of artists that did too, such as Dr. Dre, who was a hypocrite because he sampled everything to make his music in the first place. This was a matter of controlling everything that was Metallica, which was not only owned by them, but also their record labels as well. After all, the professionals should have control over what they want, right? It was simply a matter of defending their turf. 2, Metallica in the past was supportive of bootleg sharing of their live concerts, and when users were banned, many of them were proven to only distribute live recordings, not copyrighted material, so they unbanned them. 3, many people who were mad at the band already owned their albums, so what was the point of trashing them and breaking them in the first place? Again, this wasn't about money at all, it was control, something they had always been for since the beginning. And 4, this was a very new touchy subject at the time, and Metallica had no idea what the consequences would be. Lars Ulrich said, I wish I was more, I felt kind of ambushed by the whole thing because I didn't really know enough about what we were getting ourselves into when we jumped. We didn't know about the kind of grassroots thing, and we had been going on the last couple months in the country as this whole new phenomenon was going on. We were just so stuck in our controlling ways of wanting to control everything that had to do with Metallica. So we were caught off guard, and we had a little bit of a rougher landing than on other times when we just blindly leapt. But I'm still proud of the fact that when we did leap, and I took a lot of hits, and it was difficult. Sure, I may have torn in my fair share of albums, and I still hate copyright protection laws with a passion, especially when one of my videos will get taken off without any warning because I use a song that was protected by copyright, but I still respected Metallica for doing what they did. No other artist could have stepped in and brought in the attention that they did. If that was any other rock band that did it, they would have been laughed off the face of the earth. And other artists wouldn't have stepped in if they didn't have a forerunner because they were too chicken to stand up for themselves. Some artists freely choose to distribute their music, others don't. Later on, Metallica would release several songs for free to their fans. Nowadays, they probably don't really care if their music is downloaded. Metallica may have started it in 2000, but they sure didn't make the copyright controversy worse. It was companies like Viacom and Warner Music Group that made it worse with their constant deleting of YouTube videos and banning YouTube accounts because of things they own, even if they were simply samples normally protected by fair use. That was when it went over the line. Did Metallica lose some fans? Yeah. Did they gain more back? Yeah. And also, many people agreed with the whole, you shouldn't illegally download copyright stuff. This wasn't selling out. This wasn't something for money. Bands get very little money per CD sale anyway that it's a joke. The only real way that bands make money is through concert tours, which Metallica still does on a regular basis, and they still draw crowds larger than 40 to 50,000 on every continent. This was a matter of defending their turf and having them have the final say in their music and their product, not some college student who thinks professional touring bands shouldn't be paid for what they do. Myth number 8, Saint Anger, enough said. Almost everyone seems to tear Saint Anger a new one, and I'm one of the few that love the album. It's what got me into them in the first place. The songs and the lyrics dealt with interpersonal feelings I had at the time. This was an album where James Hetfield became one of my role models and heroes for being a changed man who tries to be better for himself and his family and everyone around him. Saint Anger, the album, may have been a mess, but between the Napster controversy, Jason leaving the band, their lack of any pre-written material when they started working on it, Hetfield's leave of absence and rehab schedule during it, it becoming so unfocused that they embraced every dumb idea as to not hurt anyone's feelings, it was only going to be a mess and only be good at a certain level, and not at all at the same level of excellence before. Saint Anger may have been a weak album by Metallica standards, and it may have showcased a band that was in trouble at the time, and as former bandmate by now Jason Newsted said, it was lame and weak that they couldn't get it together. After many years and squillions of dollars, the biggest heavy band of all time couldn't get it together. Need I remind you that if Saint Anger didn't happen, there'd be no more Metallica ever. No more shows, no more albums, and no more to add to their legacy. On the documentary Some Kind of Monster, their therapist coach, Phil Toll, said, "What we're doing for each other now isn't for this album, it's for the next one." But fans didn't seem to care. For the many that still pretend this album doesn't exist, they only care that there were no solos, that the snare drum was turned off, and the album's production sound as a whole was intentionally off. That's from the same people that always kept saying, "This isn't Master of Puppets. They need to grow their hair again and become Alcoholica again. These people need to grow up." In a recent interview, James Hetfield is quoted as saying, "We thought Saint Anger was going to be amazing, but it turned out to be more of a statement than Metallica music than we enjoy playing live. It was more of a purge, just getting that stuff out of me as a catalyst for the next chapter. And had it not been for this album, there would be no All Nightmare Long from Death Magnetic, which is regarded by many longtime fans as the best song they wrote since their heyday. And you know when and where this song actually came from? The Saint Anger recording sessions. Don't believe me? Just YouTube Shadows of the Cross, which is a demo that didn't make the cut for the Saint Anger album. Then listen to the demo version of All Nightmare Long called Flamingo. Then listen to All Nightmare Long. Yeah, you know I'm right. And lastly, what about the album Lulu? Alright, a lot of fans dislike their collaboration with Lou Reed, and I can't find one person that does like the album. And I can't find one person that even cares for Lou Reed either. The only reason why they collaborated was because of their little performance at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame concert. Lou Reed was someone that was always out there in terms of musicianship anyway. His straightforward rock albums in the 70s were also not for typical listeners. Far different than anything else out there. And then he made Metal Machine music, which many thought was a joke because it literally had no rhythm or beat, just simply an hour of noise. But please remember this, Lulu wasn't really a Metallica album. This was music that Lou Reed wrote that Metallica played in the studio, and that Lou Reed sung and Hetfield mainly did some chants. When this album came out, it was literally like it never existed because of the content. And even I still can't get over Lou Reed on the album, which is pretty much like this. I'm Lou Reed. I'm not going to sing. I'm just going to randomly talk with no rhyme or rhythm. Just annoy the crap out of you while Metallica plays music. I won't shut up because I am the cheese. I'm the best character on the show. I'm better than Metallica. Listen to me. Now here's Hetfield with some grunts. I am the ghost. I am the toaster. I love cookies. Now back to me. I'm the star of this album. I'm Lou Reed. Remember me in the 70s? I used to not suck. Berlin, good. Hey, stop it. Now I'll shut up so you can hear the rest of the band. The album was far from commercial and was far from anything having to do with losing integrity for financial gain. It could have taken off, but it didn't. Lou Reed isn't a very relevant figure anymore, and Metallica wasn't going to gain anything from it. Like Saint Anger, this was simply a failed experiment. The musicians themselves acknowledged the criticism. Lou Reed said, I didn't even have any fans left. They all left after Metal Machine music. I just did it for the fun in it. Who cares? And Hetfield even said, we just wanted to spread our wings and try something new. Who cares? By this point, there should be no accusations of them selling out. They didn't gain anything from the Lou Reed collaboration, and they didn't lose anyone. We all pretty much figured out right away that this wasn't a true Metallica record, so why bother giving it so much flack? And here we are in 2013. Metallica is still just as relevant as now as they were in 1986. I'm still just going to wait patiently for their next record because That will mean they tour by my town again, and every Southern California show will be attended on the rail by yours truly. There is only one way these boys have sold out. Every seat, every show for the last 30 years. I'm Desert Coyote 22, and thank you for enduring this rant and my tribute to my favorite band.